I'm super excited. Today is going to be my video about Core F, the readers and read-alouds. This is going to be part 2 of my series on Sonlight, on my homeschool curriculum for 2021. This is Sonlight Core F. Recommended age is 11 to 14. Recommended grade is 6 to 9. Woo! Okay, now we got that out of the way. We're going to start with read-alouds. First one up is Yangtze of the Upper Yangtze. So this book was so good, and it kind of started out slow. It is set in China in the 1920s, and it was just a lot of history in it, but it did start out slow, and then it got so good, and then by the end, my son and I were like, and of course I cried, because that's what I do at the end of every, good book I read. So definitely recommend Yangtze of the Upper Yangtze. I swear I am going to try to go really fast because I know that we have so many books and I don't want you guys to miss any of them, but yes, first one. All the Small Poems and 14 More. So as I've said in previous videos, Sonlight always starts with 2 books. It starts with the big read aloud, and then it has the poem book, and you read the poems just a little bit every day, 1 or 2 pages generally speaking. So this one you read a chapter or 2 a day, this one you read a few pages a day. So we'll be going through the poem book. That is the one poem book for the whole year. The next book we read was Kite Fighters. Kite Fighters was really fun. This one is about 2 brothers in Seoul, Korea in 1473. So a very interesting time. It was really fun to read about. My son and I both really enjoyed this book as well. A couple of these books started out kind of slow. So just bear with me, bear with them, because they are worth the read. This one also, we both were kind of surprised. It felt like took a very different turn than we were anticipating. Okay, so I'm going to read you a little bit of back this one. I'm not going to read the back of all of them. I'm just going to read some of the ones that I want to make sure you guys really get to know about it. So this one is about a boy who is an apprentice at a puppet theater. Who is this man called Saburo, the mysterious bandit who robs the rich and helps the poor, and what is his connection to Yoshida, the harsh and ill-tempered master of feudal Japan's most famous puppet theater? Young Jiro, an apprentice to Yoshida, is determined to find out, even at risk to his own life. So again, we thought the back sounded fun, and then the book kind of started out slow, and then it got really good. Okay, this one definitely on one of my favorite books of all time. I loved this story. So you find out really quick when you're making YouTube videos that things that are hard to pronounce suddenly become a big deal. When you're reading to your kids, you don't know how to say her name, you kind of just fumble through, and then maybe you make up your own version of how to say it. But when you're doing YouTube videos, you want to say the names correctly. So if you're ever starting your own channel, just take note of that. All of a sudden, everything that you don't know how to pronounce becomes blaringly obvious. Okay, when Oriana was a baby, a horse accidentally crushed her foot, cursing her family with bad luck. Oriana vows to restore good fortune to her family, but how? This is set in China in 1339. So the next one is Breaking Stone's Nose. And I definitely found this book to be interesting. It brought big problems to a level that, my child could understand at a much younger age. I think he was about 10 when we read this book. This was a really good book, and like I said, it's very short. It was a very fast read, but it was a good read, and I definitely recommend it. This book is probably the book that I have told the most people about what I would consider horror stories. Okay, they're not actually horror stories, but the stories from this book have haunted me. So that's why I say that. The Land I Lost. Adventures about a boy in Vietnam. Now, the book is amazing. I have to recommend it, but just be prepared that some of the stories are fairly traumatic. I found them at least to be pretty traumatic. I won't read them all to you. I can't even tell you about them all, but there are 15 different stories in this book, and they're all just mind-blowing and in some cases horrifying, and in some cases very sweet. Next book is The Rickshaw Girl, and it was a really good book about a girl in Bangladesh. Just her story, it was good. Definitely recommend this one. Teresa of Calcutta. I read this as a child, but I had forgotten so much of the story, so it actually was really great reading it again with my son and just going through everything, her story from before she became Teresa of Calcutta, really, through her life. And so I like that it started at kind of the beginning when she has a different name and she's just a totally different person. This was a really good book. The next one is called Shadow Spinner. This was another really good book. I told you guys, these books were amazing from Core F. So this one is about Shahrazad, who has to tell a story every night. And basically, The Sultan, if he's not interested in the story, like he's just gonna kill the person telling the story. They're trying to keep the Sultan happy, and so there's one girl who's like going out and finding stories, and then the girl that's telling the story that's like saving all the women, basically. I don't know how else to explain this, but this was a really, really good story as well. And and again, teaching like culture, teaching so many things, like teaching history, teaching culture, but in a really fun, interesting way that I will not forget now because it was very interesting. So yeah, one of the things about Sonlight is that they do so much to incorporate. They do so much to incorporate history and geography in their read alouds, and that is what makes them so good, because we're reading these books, we're looking at the map, we're seeing where they're located, we're looking at the time frame, we're putting it in our timeline book and seeing all these different things, and it's kind of painting this beautiful picture of the time frame, the location, all this stuff, and bringing history to life in a way that you just don't get from reading a textbook about something that happened. The next one is called 7 Daughters and 7 Sons. I actually didn't read this book. Somehow it got mixed up, and my son thought he had to read it on his own, so he read this book on his own, but he did enjoy it. It was a good book. Note to Parents. On page 151, there was a part that was like a little bit about puberty, and I didn't necessarily feel like he was ready at that time. I mean, you could read it and see what you think. Everybody's different, but that's just how I felt about it. This is A Long Walk to the Water. It's set in Sudan. It was very interesting about, I can't tell you guys all the things, but I did find it interesting, and it definitely put some things that we take for granted into perspective, and I enjoyed it for that reason, because I did think it taught a good lesson. So this was a good book too. Beat the Story Drum Pum Pum. It's got like 5 different tales. These are 5 Nigerian folk tales. So just kind of, again, teaching culture, right? Teaching Nigerian folk tales. Like, where else are you going to get that? I love it. This one is Journey to Joburg, a South African story. The next one is Call It Courage. I think I talk about it, but there's kind of definitely a theme of like courage in some of Sonlight's books, and I love that about Sonlight because that's definitely something I want to still instill in my children. And the last book in the read alouds for the whole year is A Boy and His Horse by C.S. Lewis. That wraps up the read aloud. So those are all the books that you should read out loud to your 6th through 9th graders if you're doing Core F this year. If you're ordering that from Sonlight, those are all the books that will be coming for you to read out loud to your kids, and they're so good. Next are the books that they will be reading on their own. These are all the readers. So these are all the books they'll be reading on their own. First one is Whelan, A Lot of Courage. Good book. Although he lives in a fishing village on the coast of China, Whelan is strangely afraid of the sea. Other boys in the village taunt him, and even his father calls him a coward. When Whelan refuses to go fishing, his parents banish him to the mountaintop with just a small satchel of food and a few rice seedlings. There, high above his home, Whelan proves there are many brands of courage. Again, I think there is definitely a theme of courage in Core F, which I loved. Sweet and Sour, Tales from China. Take a journey to the Far East in these 24 clever and concise tales from China that are sure to amuse, enlighten, and entertain. Fables, parables, and jokes spanning the last 2,000 years come together to create a tribute to the age-old tradition of storytelling. Whether enjoyed piecemeal or read all in one sitting, this delectable collection is a treasure to be savored. The Year of the Dog by Grace Lynn. It's the lunar year of the dog. When Pacey's mom tells her that this is a good year for friends, family, and finding herself, Pacey begins searching right away. As the year goes on, she struggles to find her talent, deals with disappointment, and makes a new best friend, and discovers just why the Year of the Dog is a lucky one for her after all. There's also the Year of the Rat and Dumpling Days in this series. God's Adventure, about Hudson Taylor. I remember reading about Hudson Taylor when I was a child, so I was excited for my son to read this book. Hudson Taylor was still a teenager when God told him to go to China. Alone, broke, and even critically ill, he hung on to that goal and to God who was sending him. But would God be enough? Alone in China, Hudson had lots of chances to find out. There's plenty of danger, adventure, and action in this true story of a man who dared to risk all. The Big Wave. Kino lives on a farm on this side of the mountain in Japan. His friend Jaya lives in a fishing village below. Everyone, including Kino and Jaya, has heard of the big wave. No one suspects it will wipe out the whole village and Jaya's family too. As Jaya struggles to overcome his sorrow, he understands it is in the presence of danger that one learns to be brave and to appreciate how wonderful life can be. I remember when my son read this and he ran and told me all about it because it definitely struck a chord with him. Born in the Year of Courage. See? Courage again. It's the mid-1800s, and Manjiro, a young fisherman, is shipwrecked far off the coast of his native Japan. At this time in history, Japan is an isolated country that allows its citizens no contact with the rest of the world. Foreigners are called barbarians, and none are more despised than Americans. And when Manjiro and his fishing companions are rescued by an American ship, Manjiro makes some startling discoveries about the world of the barbarians and about his own country. His dramatic rescue leads to a series of amazing escapades, and in the end, Manjiro travels farther than he ever dreamed. This one talks about specifically Oahu, which is the island that we lived on, and so my son was like really overjoyed because we were living on Oahu, and then they were talking about Oahu at the time that we were reading this book, so that was fun. The Cat Who Went to Heaven. In ancient Japan, a struggling artist is angered when his housekeeper brings him a tiny white cat he can barely afford to feed. But when the village's head priest commissions a painting of the Buddha for a healthy sum, the artist softens toward the animal he believes has brought him luck. I actually didn't have my son read this book just for personal reasons, but this one is in the series, and I think it was only like a week-long read, so I just had him skip this one. Burying the Sun by Gloria Whelan, followed right after by The Turning. And I'm just going to say right now, so this one he read, and it was a good book, right? I didn't make him read this one because it was about a ballerina, and I love Sonlight, and I usually have him read all the books, but every once in a while, if there's a book that he finds especially distasteful, like a story about a ballerina in Russia, I don't force it. I'm like, well, you can read other books right now. That's one of the great things about homeschooling. It's your discretion. It's up to you what you want them to read, and if you find that book appropriate or not, or interesting or not, or whatever. Around the World in 80 Days, fun thing you could do is like watch the movie with Jackie Chan, like after you read this book. I am pretty sure we did that, but I know that he read this one. Obviously, I don't really need to talk about it because you probably know what it is already, but it's a good book. William Carey, Christian Heroes Then and Now. Love this series. I buy them at Goodwill. I buy them wherever I can find them because they're so good, but this was about William Carey. William Carey watched from the dock as the magnificent sailing ship headed for the English Channel without him. Tears filled his eyes and deep disappointment filled his heart. What would he tell the missionary society? So much work awaited him half a world away. He must get to India, and soon. Next one was Ali and the Golden Eagle. I've never seen a more powerful bird than the golden eagles, said Ali. They could be so big and fast in the air. If I could train one, I could be the best falconer in all the world. This one is set in Saudi Arabia. Also sound like a really awesome book. This one is called The Habibi. This one sounds so interesting. The day after Liana got her first real kiss, her life changed forever. Not because of the kiss, but because it was the day her father announced that the family was moving from St. Louis all the way to Palestine. Though her family grew up there, Liana knows very little about her family's Arab heritage. Her grandmother and the rest of her relatives who live in the West Bank are strangers and speak a language she can't understand. It isn't until she meets Omer that her homesickness fades. But Omer is Jewish, and their friendship is silently forbidden in this land. How can they make their families understand, and how can Liana ever learn to call this place home? That sounds so good. I don't remember what my son told me about it, but it sounds really interesting. King of the Wind, by the same author as Justin Morgan Had a Horse, which I talk about in another one of my videos because that is another book from one of the other cores of Sonlight. This one is another Christian series and a Now series. I love them. Mary Slessor, Forward into Calabar. So she was from Scotland and she became a missionary in Africa. Definitely looks like a good book. Red Sand, Blue Sky. This one is actually set in Australia, and I interviewed an Australian homeschool mom on my channel, and we talked about the fact that we're kind of sad that there's not a lot of history on Australia, and there's not a lot of books about Australia in the Sonlight curriculum or really in any public school curriculum in America, and that made us both sad. So definitely, if you haven't already, watch that video. I'll try to link it in the cards up here. But yeah, this is a really good book. It says, at the center of Australia is a vast desert known as the Outback. For 12-year-old Amy Wilson from Melbourne, it is a world unlike anything she's ever seen. Who would suspect that here Amy would find a new friend and one who understands her as no one else can? There's more, but I'm not going to read the whole thing, and it looks really, really good. And the last one that he read for the year was Water Sky. And this one is set in Alaska, so there's a wide variety, but still, his main focus was the Eastern Hemisphere and Asia, and then, Iran and Africa, and so, yes, but this one looks really good too. I don't remember, I cannot remember all of the things that happened in all these books that my son read that year. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'm going to put a link to the other curriculum reviews and then the screen-free activities for you guys, and I hope you join me for my next video.